Hello, Adrian here. So now that we've looked through the basic interface and moving around your camera controls, we want to pull in an object and move it around. And, well, move it around, transform it, whatever you like to do. So we probably have noticed as I've been clicking things, these little widgets on here. So I'm going to just drag down a cube so we're not editing our our little house over here, because we don't want to move that guy around. We want to be putting things around our architecture and maybe put some clutter, some blocks, some tables, some chairs, maybe some little models of people. And so if I just click on this guy and hit F, it'll zoom in and focus on that model. And as you can see, we have these three little pointy arrowy things. These represent our axes. So we have blue for Z, green for Y, and red for X. And we can just move them around by grabbing on those little handles, and you can see as I hover over, there's these little arrow icon and then a little grip icon. And if you see these little sort of right angles in here, that lets you use two axes to move around. So I now have a plane of Z and Y, or I can move across another plane of Z and X. And so within these, you can do sort of basic movement around your objects. If you click on up on the top right, we had select and translate objects. We can now go and select and rotate objects. And we can now rotate this around one of the given axes. It's the same as before. We have our color coding of X, Y, and Z, and we can rotate stuff around those. As we went over with the interface, you'll also notice that down in the details panel under transform, these numbers are now changing based off of our manipulation. So you can see down here that rotation's now changed because I've been rotating our model. And so within these little handles, and with, of course, our third one over here, scale, because we like to blow things out of proportion once in a while, we can scale our object based off of an axis, or drag the center node to uniformly scale in all directions, or grab one of these little angles and scale it across two dimensions. But within all these handles, of course, you can do it manually through transform, but that's not quite as fun as sort of just dragging it into place where you want to see it. Just because you might want some sort of finer control, as you can see, this sort of jumps from left to right as I move this. That's because we have a snapping sort of tool enabled. So as you'll see, there'll be these three orange buttons here. These are setting snaps on, so to speak. So this sets objects to a grid when you're moving them. This sets snapping of rotation, and this sets snapping of scale. And to the right of those, you have the increments that those are snapping to. Just remember that everything's in centimeters, so you're moving in 10 centimeter jumps if you have it at 10. If you're rotating, it's in degrees, and you also have divisions of degrees, so depending on how you want to be rotating things, you can use those. So if I just want to rotate this 45 degrees, I set to 45, click on rotate, and I can rotate it very easily to 45-degree angle. And look at my new cube, it's now, it's now pointing up. Now we have like a little sort of marker of sorts if we want to indicate something without like using a tangible object. But if you want to just rotate your stuff around, it's very easy to do it through that. And if I want to also scale things, I can have a very, very smooth scale if I set it down to this strangely arbitrary number and drag this, and you'll see, oops, got to select scale or else it doesn't do anything. You can see it scales very, very smoothly. And if I switch it up to say 10, it's going to scale in blocks of 10, which actually might not, oh, yeah, there we go. Look at that big pointy thing, this phallic object of sorts. We don't want to have this, we want to go back to our block. Our block's nicer. Oh, that's too flat. But yeah, so you want to be reasonable with the amount that you're scaling by. But that's the basics of sort of moving things around, rotating, scaling them. The last thing you'll need to know is that you can actually jump to these keys rather than always clicking these buttons by clicking W for move, E for rotate, and R for scale. I know it's not as obvious as it should be, but when you're just sort of clicking around, you'll get used to going through the three of these. You can immediately switch between them with ease. And if you ever want to cancel anything that you've done to this object, if you go over to your details panel, you'll see these little undo sort of arrows. These will reset things to default. So if I click on, for instance, the rotation, it'll rotate that back to 0, 0, 0, and with scale, it'll scale it back to the original block. And you should always pay attention to these so as you don't accidentally sort of stretch your objects out of proportion. Oh, and be aware that there's a little lock symbol on here. That locks the three scale objects together so you don't asymmetrically scale an object that you don't want to. So you don't want a chair that's oddly wide or a house that's sort of smushed in one direction. But That's the basics of movement. Well, basics of movement, and now basics of moving other things than yourself. So, see you next video.
This project was supported by a UTS Widening Participation Strategy, First Year Experience Grant, funded through the Australian Government Higher Education Participation and Partnership Program. The videos were produced by Matthew Austin and Adrian Taylor.